It has been an unprecedented week in the United Kingdom. Joining us now for some perspective on it all, Skyping in from along the English-Welsh border near Hereford, UK, Gwythian Prince, Emeritus Research Professor at the London School of Economics and Senior Visiting Academic Fellow at l'École Spéciale Militaire in Saint-Cyr, France. He voted leave. And here in our studio, Randall Hansen, Interim Director of the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T. He, incidentally, is a dual citizen, lived and worked in the UK for 13 years, and voted Remain. Randall, lovely to see you again here in our studio. Gwythian, it's great to have you on our program for the first time. I want to start by playing a couple of clips just to bring us up to scratch on the week that was, and what a week it was. Tuesday, Prime Minister Theresa May puts her deal for Brexit before the British Parliament. It is turned down by the biggest margin apparently ever for a sitting UK government, 230 votes, and here's what it looked like. Roll the clip, please.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
This is a catastrophic defeat for this government. After 2 years of failed negotiations, the House of Commons has delivered its verdict on her Brexit deal. I have now tabled a motion of no confidence in this government. And I'm pleased that motion will be debated tomorrow, so this House can give its verdict on the sheer incompetence of this government.
Well, it certainly looked desperate for the government of the day. That's Jeremy Corbyn, the opposition leader. And yet, when they went for the vote of no confidence, not quite. Second clip, please.
Order! Order! The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325.
And with that, Theresa May's government survives by a mere 19 votes. All of this 70 days before the Brexit deadline approaches. Okay, everybody seems to think we're in uncharted waters now. Gwythian, start us off. Where do you think things stand tonight?
In your introduction, Steve, in quite unprecedented circumstances. The vote is, as you described, without precedent. Also without precedent was the behavior of the Speaker, who you just saw in that last clip, because Mr. Bercow has broken with all precedent since 1642 to allow, in a very partisan manner, a motion which is forcing the Prime Minister to come back to the House early next week. Now, that breaking with precedent is no trivial matter, because the last time something like this happened, we had a civil war which followed it, which was the biggest disaster in our collective national history. So, unprecedented moment. But there isn't much surprise about the difference between the two votes. The so-called withdrawal agreement, which when you look at it, all 500 and so pages, and for my sins I've done so, is of course misnamed. It's not a withdrawal agreement. And that is why you found a combination of those who want to leave, to honor the vote of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, the largest democratic vote in British history, by the way, and those passionately wanting to disrespect that vote, the Remoaners or the Remainiacs, as they're often called. They all went into the no lobby together. But when it came to supporting the government against the most left-wing Labour Prime Minister that the country has ever seen, then you found that both the strong Brexiteers and the Democratic Unionist Party combined to keep her government there. So there's no great surprise in either of those votes, in my view.
Randall, where do you think things sit right now?
Well, let's begin with one point of agreement, which is that that's absolutely right, that the non-confidence vote, the result of the no-confidence vote, was no surprise. And that's because the Conservative Party's terrified of a Corbyn victory. Corbyn wants to create sort of a Venezuela on the Thames. And the DUP view him as
Northern Irish
Northern
Party.
Ireland Protestants. They view him as sort of an IRA sympathizer. Where I fundamentally disagree is on
both of which are correct, by the way, Randall.
Sorry?
Both
Both of which are correct, yeah. See, there's some points of agreement. Where I think I disagree is on the issue of a parliament asserting its role. I won't put words into the distinguished speaker's mouth, but for decades, those who are now Brexiters have complained that the EU is a threat to parliamentary sovereignty. This is a classic moment of Parliament reasserting itself and taking control of a process which, and again, I think we probably agree on that, has been a fiasco under the Prime Minister. So I think Parliament's doing exactly what it should.
Well, Gwithian did say a moment...
Well, let's get that just clear, because we mustn't let that pass for your listeners. With all due respect, which is what you always say when you're going to say something slightly impolite about someone, that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the Constitution, Randall. Government governs. Parliament makes laws. Parliament does not govern. And the attempt to make Parliament the governor is exactly what the Bercow and Romaniac putsch last week was attempting to do. And that's why it's so dangerous, because you cannot have a situation in which Parliament dictates the terms to the government. As we'll come on to later, as it happens, all of this is quite futile, because we will leave on the 29th of March of this year anyway, because it's an act of Parliament that we will do so.
Well, we shouldn't get too hung up on this, I think. That might be the case, the leaving point. I disagree. Parliament is not governing here. It's governing here. It's doing what a legislature should do, which is holding an executive to account. But this isn't. I think this isn't the fundamental issue at stake.
Okay, let's get to the fundamental issue here, which is something Gwithian said a little while ago, which is that the agreement that was hammered out, in his view, is not really a true Brexit. And let's just take a moment here to go through the 500-plus page deal that took 500-plus days to negotiate. Could we have this graphic, please? Here's what was agreed to. The United Kingdom would have had to honor all financial commitments to the EU and pay the 2019 and 2020 budgets. It would have allowed for a transition period until the end of 2020 or even until 2023. They would have had to maintain the residence and social security rights of more than 3 million EU citizens living in the UK and 1 million UK nationals living on the continent. The UK would have stayed in the EU customs union with Northern Ireland following single market rules to avoid what they call a hard Irish border. Britain would have participated in EU joint defence projects. Judgments from the European Court of Justice would have been binding in the UK. Randall, can you see why some people who wanted a Brexit don't really see that as a Brexit?
Oh, sure. I mean, I can understand. I mean, it's amazing that May managed to unite Remainers and Brexiters. I can see both sides of the argument. What I don't think is there's any better deal out there. And there's a fundamental choice to be made here. I mean, Theresa May boxed herself in with her red lines. That's the problem here. Either you're in the customs union, in which case you can't negotiate free trade deals. You stay in the single market, you don't have control of migration, and you're subject to the European Court of Justice. And if you don't like any of those, then your only real choice is a hard Brexit, which I think would be disastrous for the UK. But I suspect that's going to be a point of disagreement.
I think Gwithian may take a different side on this. What was your view of the 500-plus page agreement that was hammered out between the UK and the EU?
Well, I guess that, Steve, you and I are of a generation, and you'll remember the Eagles song, Hotel California.
Indeed.
You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave.
Yes.
And that's what this is. It's a Hotel California, or so-called Brino, Brexit in name only. And it's designed that way. And by the way, among the many extraordinary things that's happened in this country in the last fortnight, an extremely courageous anonymous civil servant who is deep within the machine published an article in the Daily Telegraph 10 days ago explaining that the civil service is actually completely prepared to leave without any negotiation with the EU. It's had 2.5 years to prepare all the necessary steps, and all those steps have been made. So it's a fiction to suggest that, as the Romaniac side puts it, that the chosen verb of the BBC, shamefully, is that leaving without a deal is crashing out. I mean, this is just utter nonsense. We're simply going to trade with the EU the way that we trade with the rest of the world, and most of our trade is with the rest of the world.
Randall, can I get your take on this notion of crashing out, that the deadline might come, there will be no deal? And Britain just leaves.
Well, I'm no one can use a Hotel California reference. I got it. I'm young enough to catch it. So I want to pick up that point first. Of course you can leave the EU. No one's saying you can't leave the EU. That's why there's Article 50. What the EU is saying is that if you leave the club, you don't have the benefits of membership. What the EU has really said from the beginning, in which Theresa May and a lot of Brexiters, not our distinguished guests, but a lot of Brexiters, are denying, is that basic fact. You leave, you lose the privileges, you will be poor. I'm glad to avoid the word crashing out. I would also like to avoid the word Remainiac or Ramoner. I don't think name-calling helps. I've never referred to any Brexiter as thick or racist. We simply have a point of disagreement on the evidence. It might be the case that one civil servant thinks the country is prepared. The Confederation of British Industry, the Treasury, and the vast majority of economists believe that the UK is woefully ill-prepared. We shall see, but I think it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be pretty at Dover-Calais, sorry, I blurred the two languages, where 10,000 lorries pass through every day, and where you have just-in-time supply lines. In the case of the auto industry, they're going to be immediately disrupted. And over the long term, London is going to be absolutely fine. It was a major financial center before, it will be after. But manufacturing, well-paid, unionized jobs, ironically, in the Brexit heartlands, they're going to be hammered and destroyed. And economists for Brexit admits that. They say this is going to be good for the UK, but we can say goodbye to manufacturing. Well, they're right on the latter, wrong on the former.
Let me ask Gwithian about some of the fallout that we're seeing, because some Brits, we've seen the stories in the news, some Brits have started stockpiling food and medicine. We've heard the government is putting 3,500 troops on standby. Hysteria or sensible preparation in your view?
If you keep count, this is Project Fear Mark IV. We had the first bout of this before the referendum, when we had exactly the same people that Randall is describing, saying that the skies were going to fall, that the economy was going to contract when it actually expanded after we had voted to leave, and all the other predictions that were made that were going to happen, that were made by the chairman, the Canadian chairman of the Bank of England, turned out to be quite untrue. But I want to just pick up, before we go further on this, something we were saying in an earlier answer, which is that Mrs. May's fundamental mistake was to believe that she had to produce a deal which somehow offered a bit to each side. This was, after all, a quite clear referendum result. It was 52-48. It's a lot clearer, for example, than Quebec in 1995, which was by a cigarette paper. And yet, you cannot compromise on sovereignty. And what I want to insist on, and the point I was making earlier about security goes to the heart of it, is that the fundamental misunderstanding by those on the Remain side, and by the way, Randall, the reason I used the words which you took exception to, they're disrespectful words because they apply to people who disrespect the majority vote of the public. And that fundamental disrespect comes from a failure to understand what this referendum was about. It was not about economics. It was not about a transactional offer that you were going to be richer or poorer. It was about the return of sovereignty. And that is what will happen on the 29th. And let me explain very quickly why. Fortunately, on the Remain side, a combination of very clever people, led by a hedge funder called Gina Miller and a very distinguished QC called Lord Panic, perhaps appropriately, brought a case which went to the Supreme Court, which forced the government to legislate by Act of Parliament over Article 50. The result of that is that the date of leaving is inscribed in statute law by two acts of Parliament, the repeal of the 1972 Withdrawal Act and now the legislated passing of the Article 50, both by enormous majorities in the House of Commons. And therefore, we will leave on this date. There's no question, unless there is primary legislation. Look, your legislature is the same as ours. Primary legislation to repeal both of those acts of parliament, and nobody really sees that happening. So we will be leaving. The only question is, on what term? The notion that trading with the European Union, which, by the way, is a declining part of Britain's total economic activity. We are the strongest economy in Europe. We are also the most forward-looking. We make ideas, we make services, we make financial transactions. We don't bang metal, albeit very beautifully, like the Germans. And the Eurozone economy is in stagnation. So you spoke earlier, Randall, about the privileges that we will lose. There are many of us who think that, frankly, there's not a great deal to be got from being associated with what is patently a collapsing project. So why on earth would you want to be associated, chained to a corpse?
Would the departure of the UK from the EU, in your view, Randall, be a fatal blow for the EU? Maybe fatal's putting it too strong. Would it be a devastating blow?
Oh, you're not going to let me respond to any of that. All right, will it be a fatal blow for the EU?
I just wanted to pick up where he left off.
No, it won't be. I mean, I'd like to see how collapse is measured here. If we look at public support for the European Union, it is at, partly thanks to the catastrophe that is Brexit, at a 25-year high and highest among the most recent members of the European Union. So our distinguished guest has compared, which I regard as really quite outrageous, the European, though he's welcome to make the comparison, the European Union to the Soviet Union. I would encourage him to ask Poles, 85% of whom strongly support the European Union, if they think life in the EU, when at the moment they are growing at almost 5% per year. There are 500 million people in the European Union. There is no one European Union. Greece is in recession. Poland, Hungary are absolutely booming. Germany's dipped, but has done great over the last 10 years. And the Nordic countries are always doing well. Growing at 5% in Poland and passionately in support of the European Union, the people, not the government.
There are some people, Professor Prince, who are looking for a way out of this that can satisfy, the largest chunk of Brits as possible. And one idea that's come forward, we'll talk about a couple of them right now. One idea is a second referendum. How would you regard that?
Well, that would be a constitutional outrage. The people have already spoken. We've had the largest single vote on an issue in favor ever in the history of British democracy. That was the 2016 referendum vote to leave the European Union. And the government said, you will remember, that the vote was handed by Parliament back to the people and they would do what the people told them. The people instructed them to leave. Now, that's not very difficult to understand. Leave means leave. It means that you're going to leave the single market, you're going to leave the customs union, you're going to leave the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, you're going to take back control of your borders and of your finances. None of this is complicated. And that is what the people want. And that is the sort of deal, frankly, which I think we're likely to get. And the reason is that the EU has far more to fear from us leaving on a sovereign Brexit without any negotiation than we do. Why? Because we then don't pay the money, the voluntary money, the 39 billion which we've offered. We have no obligation to pay that, by the way, but which is necessary for their funds. The situation in Europe is simply not, well, it depends, I suppose, what you look at. Clearly, Randall and I look at different things. Go talk to the Gilets jaunes, go talk to the supporters of the 5-star in Italy. Talk to the people who are going in the forthcoming European elections to dominate the European Parliament. These are the people who are going to bring about the end of this project in its present form. And the comparison with the Soviet Union, by the way, so that nobody misunderstands it, is not on ideology or content. It is on the nature and speed of the likely collapse of the project. And the reason that the comparison is valid is that both institutions have lost legitimacy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said once that the single most difficult thing to achieve in all of politics is legitimacy for power. And the European Union has patently lost that. and it's lost it right the way across the member states. Britain happens to be the first one to be leaving. I'm half Dutch. The first text message that I got on the morning of our vote didn't come from anybody in England. It came from one of my Dutch friends saying, we're going to be next. This is unstoppable. And so it's the loss of fundamental legitimacy and the fact that the project is constructed as an elite project which has very little respect for the views of the people, just frankly as the Remainers have very little respect for the people who voted to leave. They think that somehow we were all thick or misled or something. Not so. And that is why Project Fear didn't work the first time. That's why it's not working now. And the more that they pull out business people and chairman of the Bank of England and all the rest of these people to say it's all going to be a disaster, it makes no difference at all. People are not impressed by that because they voted to leave on a matter of principle. And what is most worrying about the deal, as I and my colleagues in Veterans for Britain, because I worked with the British Armed Forces for getting on for 40 years now, have warned, and as was made very clear by the former chief of the Secret Intelligence and the chief of the Defence Staff, Richard Dearlove, and Field Marshal Lord Guthrie, is that at the heart of the deal there is a fundamental compromise of British national security which will affect your country too, because it would damage the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, which is the very bedrock of the security of the Western world. And why? Because Mrs. May wanted to offer this as a sort of plea to be given something which the EU was never going to give her, which was the deal that she wanted.
Okay, let me jump in here because with time running out, I want your view, Randall, on a second referendum, the advisability of doing that.
Yeah, sure. Well, on the issue of collapse, again, I would simply refer to the incredibly strong support the EU enjoys in public opinion. And he's quite right, the far right is going to do well in the European Parliament, but many of them, including the Front National in France, want a different EU, not out of the EU. And that is quite a fundamental distinction. On the issue of the referendum, the will of the people, well, the will of the people, the argument that it's expressed once and never again, is an argument of dictators and demagogues. But I want to back up. There shouldn't have been a referendum in the first place. They have no place within Westminster democracies. If a party wanted to leave the European Union, it could have put it in the manifesto and put it to the British people in an election, which, to its credit, the United Kingdom Independence Party wanted to do. The referendum was called this time, like it was called in the 1970s, to avoid a split within the party. Labour in the 1970s, the Tories in 2016.
Well, that was Cameron's mistake.
It was a huge mistake, and he was solving a problem in the Conservative Party, not a problem in the country.
Right. But he did it.
It's done. It's done.
Time is running on.
I'm going to finish this point. If it is the will of the people, if that is the will, let them express it again. Let them ask them if they want to change their mind now that we know that what Brexit is going to look like. If they want to vote again, they can. The Leavers oppose another referendum because they think they're going to lose. That's why they're afraid of the people about whom we hear such praise so often. Let's ask them again.
Gwithian?
All right, this is arrant nonsense, and on two fronts. By the way, I think that if we did have a second referendum, the result would be even more strongly to leave, because British people will not be bullied. They know perfectly well that they were asked and they gave the answer. Now, look, we can't spend the precious time we've got looking backwards. The fact is that Parliament handed this decision back to the people. You may or may not like referenda. That's beside the point. My views are beside the point as well. The fact is it happened. The government said, it's your decision, and we will execute it. There was then an attempt by Mrs. May to make a sort of 48-52 deal on sovereignty, which you cannot do. It's either one or the other. The notion, think of it, Randall, in terms of a general election in Canada. So you get a result that's close, and you don't like the government you've got. So you say, oh, fine, we don't actually like this general election result, so let's have another one. I mean, are we going to have the best of 3? Are we going to have the best of 5? This is nonsense. And I don't think it's going to happen. Okay. The reason is, okay.
Gwithian, let me jump in because we're literally down to I want to know finally from you. I suspect on this side of the pond, when we think of the United Kingdom, we think of the former empire, we think of Churchill, we think of success in World War II, parliamentary democracy, defeating the Nazis, etc. I'd like to know what, in your view, you think most people around the world now think of the United Kingdom, given everything that's gone on over the past 500 days.
Well, I think it's a humiliation, a national humiliation, the way that this government of Mrs. May has botched its conduct of the negotiations. What we need to do now is simply, as I was told when I was briefing on the defense and security aspects on Capitol Hill not long ago, get off our knees and rejoin the world. We are the world's fifth largest economy. We are the world's second most geopolitically competent power, for goodness sakes. We are by far and away the leading soft power in Europe. And we can make a perfectly good, amicable relationship with the failing European Union by simply offering them the same terms upon which we trade with the rest of the world.
Randall, last 30 seconds to you.
Sure.
Same question.
Well, I agree with Gwithian on one point, that the UK has made itself into a laughing stock. I don't agree that's because Mrs. May, Theresa May, Prime Minister May, has been trying to please both sides. She's been absolutely craven in her approach to the hardline Brexiteers. In her Lancaster speech, her red lines, she boxed herself in, and that's why we're in the position we are in now. And that's why we're facing, I think, an even split between a hard Brexit, completely out, or remain. On the issue of how the UK is regarded, the odd thing about this debate is you meet many people, and I include Gwithian, who seem reasonable, who support leave within the United Kingdom. Outside the United Kingdom, governments, academics, activists, friends of the United Kingdom, there is not a reasonable person who regards this as a good idea. Bloomberg yesterday again repeated his claim. This was the dumbest thing that any country has done until the Americans trumped them. And so, you know, the majority is not always right. The majority is not always right, but Gwithian does not have the weight of international opinion on his side.
Gentlemen, I'm going to jump in there.
I'm afraid we don't agree on that at all.
I'm going to jump in there and thank you both for coming on to TVO tonight for what was a mostly civilized debate on certainly one of the hottest and most fascinating topics in the world today. Gwithian Prince, Emeritus Research Professor, London School of Economics, Randall Hansen, Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, University of Toronto. Thanks, you two.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, Gwithian.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.